Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Neusel. I'm CEO of the Efficiency Council, and it's my great pleasure to be with you today for this webinar, Industrial Revolution, German Leadership on Decarbonising Industry. I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Naarm, Melbourne, the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and indeed the Aboriginal people from all of the lands from which our friends across Australia are dialing in from today. I also want to acknowledge that we had a very significant referendum on the topic of Indigenous affairs over the weekend. There was a wide range of views expressed in the referendum campaign, but one thing that I have heard from my Indigenous is that many are feeling a lot of pain right now, wherever they were on the debate, and I just want to acknowledge that and note that you're all in our thoughts. So to today's topic, this is the latest in a long collaboration between Australia and Germany, in particular the Energy Efficiency Council and DENEF, the German Business Initiative for Energy Efficiency, as well as our friends at the German Chamber, all of which is taking place under the auspices of the Australia-Germany Energy Dialogue, which has recently been upgraded to the Australia-Germany Energy and Climate Dialogue. Energy efficiency was identified in 2019 as one of the key areas for collaboration between our two great nations, and the way that we have executed that is by going through a very rigorous process of understanding where the strengths, the relative strengths of each nation is, and how we can learn from those strengths and compare notes and collaborate more effectively in particular areas. It's been an incredibly rich and fruitful collaboration. Our initial work was very much focused on buildings. So we had the Further Together report, which we released 3 years ago, and there's been a very significant agenda of work that has emerged from that, encompassing collaboration on financing, a significant interest in Germany in the role of the National Australian Built Environment Rating System. Indeed, that's led to a pilot of neighbours in Germany that is just in the process of getting underway. And indeed, a delegation of Australian experts to Berlin last year, which I led. Off the rank is industry. So, and we're looking at industry a little bit more broadly than purely through energy efficiency. We're looking at industrial decarbonisation, a topic, and that work really got underway with quite a lot of momentum earlier this year. But I might throw to my colleague Amelia Jarrett, Projects Manager at the Energy Efficiency Council, who is leading this work and is going to join us to tell us a little bit more about the report that she's working on. Hi, Amelia.
Hi, Lee. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, as you mentioned, I'm working on the second report in the Further, Faster Together series. So as you mentioned, that first report focused on residential and commercial buildings. This report will focus on industrial decarbonisation. From initial research that we've been carrying out, key topics that we will be exploring in that report include energy management systems, energy productivity and electrification, and how to unlock capital, which is what you will be hearing about today from our German experts. We plan to publish the report either at the end of this year or at the beginning of next, and we will hold another webinar to present our key areas for collaboration with Germany. If anyone does have any questions or would like any more information on the report, please contact me. I'll put my email address in the chat. It's ameliajarrett@eec.org.au. Thanks, Lee.
Fantastic. And I want to acknowledge the contribution of the German government, who is supporting the Energy Efficiency Council to undertake this scoping work, and all the experts from Australia and Germany that have already contributed a huge amount of time and expertise to this effort. Notably, the delegation that joined us from Germany in the week of the National Energy Efficiency Conference back in May. We had 8 or 9 really incredible experts in industrial decarbonisation join us from Germany, participate in the conference, but also participate in a workshop that took place at the end of this week. It was an incredibly rich workshop. There were about 25 people in the room. In a sense, this webinar is reflecting some of the key themes that were drawn out through that workshop. It was I wasn't there for half of it, but even in that sort of 2 or 3 hours, my only regret was that we weren't in a position to share more of the insights that we were gaining from our friends in Germany more broadly. And this webinar was an attempt to make an effort to share some of those insights and expertise of what is a really critical moment in Australia making, because of course we're embarking on the development of sectoral decarbonisation pathways for all sectors of the Australian economy, but the sectoral decarbonisation pathway for industry is of particular interest, and it's a space where there's a lot of policy making to do. So in terms of how this session is going to run, we're going to get 3 presentations from our 3 fantastic speakers, Paul, Lisa, and Sue. I'll introduce them in turn in a moment. We'll have an extended panel discussion because a lot of the rich space is best teased out through conversation and exchange. At that point, Tennant Reid from the Australian Industry Group will be joining us to give an industry perspective on the utility of the German experience for policy making and decarbonisation efforts here in Australia. And of course, you'll have the opportunity to drop your questions or comments or reflections into the Q&A tab, and we'll be referring to them as we navigate that conversation at the end of the webinar. So what I might do now is introduce our first speaker. Paul Papenbrock, Deputy Head of Unit Efficiency and Heat in Industry and Commerce in the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action, one of our delegates who joined us on that delegation back in May. And Paul, we're doing what we did in May and giving opportunities you did at that workshop to set the table for us, give us a bit of a sense of the policy and programs that Germany has in place and some of the things that you've been contemplating. Indeed, I think that some of the things that we're planning to do when you joined back in May have in fact now been done. So I'm excited to hear about that as well. So welcome, Paul.
Hi. Thanks, Luke. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'm Paul Papenbrock. I'm from Germany. I work in the division of energy efficiency and heat in the industrial and commercial sector. And my main focus of work during the last few months was the Energy Efficiency Act and of Germany, and of course always our funding scheme in our department. And from a working space background, I'm a lawyer. Yeah, I prepared a little presentation. I want to exchange it with you. Hopefully this works. I guess it does. It seems like it. Can you see it all? Just maybe a little yes from someone.
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. I can see it already.
Now, yes.
Yes, it is there now.
Okay, now it's working. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, and I just want to talk briefly about the legal framework in Germany of our decarbonization policies. First off, just a quick short reminder of our greenhouse gas emissions targets. Germany has the target of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions by 65% by the year 2030 and to net zero by 2045. And this little graph just shows the current development. And just as a little background information, the industrial sector, as you also can see, is responsible for about a quarter of the total greenhouse gas emissions of Germany. Yeah, and the new kid in the block, so to speak, is the Energy Efficiency Act, which is now past the first stage of Parliament, the Bundestag, recently in Germany, and is expected to be passed by the second chamber in a few days, on the 20th of October. And this will be the first legal framework to improve energy efficiency in Germany across all sectors. In parallel, it will implement the most important requirements from the Energy Efficiency Directive of the European Union, which also recently just came into effect on the 10th of October. And yeah, it will set both binding targets for primary and final energy reduction in alignment with the AED, which sets the European targets. And also there's an obligation to have an absolute reduction in final energy consumption on a federal level by 45 terawatt hours and on a
Paul,
state level by 5. Yeah.
Sorry, Paul.
Yeah,
I
can
just
you hear me?
jump in. It would appear the slides aren't. If you're trying to advance the slides, they're not advancing on our screen. We're just
not advancing.
Great.
Where are you?
Well,
It says Energy Efficiency Act on my side. I don't know what's it saying
on ours. Have you got two screens running? There we go. Now we can see it.
Is it working now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, weird. But if you can see it, it works. It works for me, and so okay.
Okay.
Are you now seeing the targets? I just said now targets.
Yes, now we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Sorry for that. I don't know what's happening. My PC is unfortunately always very slow. This is just because of security reasons, I think. Yeah, okay. Just shows you the targets of the Energy Efficiency Act. We've got, as I mentioned, targets for 2030 and 2045, and which are also derived from the EED. So for primary energy consumption, we've got a reduction target of about 40%, and final energy consumption of about 26.5% compared to 2008 as a baseline. And 2045, we've got just a final energy consumption target, a reduction of 45% compared to 2008. And there will be a little review in 2027 to discuss the targets and the progress we made as a country by then. So pretty exciting. Yeah. Do you see the graph now? Just so shows you the primary energy consumption of Germany and also the target that we have. I think it's always really interesting to show this because this shows the green part shows the renewable energy production, and it also still shows which is still correct. Not really still, but for 2024, which was the last data point we have, nuclear energy production. And if you believe, if you think about it, we have to convert all the rest basically to renewables. This is still quite the way to go, and nuclear energy has been, as you might know, phased out now, and so this is even more challenging to reach this sort of target. And yes, the final energy consumption targets also until 2045, and we also had a 2040 goal. So this is the reason why this still says 2040, but this was deleted in the parliament process. And yeah, still really challenging because if you think about it, we have to reduce our energy consumption until 2045 by basically the consumption of the private households and commercial sector combined. So really challenging. What other measures in order to achieve this? First off, we've got a requirement, an obligation to implement energy or environmental management systems for businesses with an average annual energy consumption above 7.5 gigawatt hours per year. So they have to get a certification of ISO 50001 or according to EMAS. and they have to identify and examine the use of waste heat additionally. And the reason before this is we know the systems in and themselves, they generate relevant benefits for companies. Also, years after the systems have been put into place, we made a study on this on energy management systems, because in Germany we have about 7,000 systems certifications of ISO 50001. And we did a little study at the end of last year, and we found out that even years after the implementation of those systems, the companies could still generate relevant savings. So the savings range from 3 to at best above 4%. Even for companies that implemented, as this graph shows, 15 to 19 years ago, the first time they introduced the energy management system, they could still generate about 4% of savings. So we know the systems in themselves work, and they are actually beneficial also from an economical standpoint for the companies, since our energy prices in Germany are really high, as you might know, because of the energy crisis recently, the whole conflict from Russia and our dependence on the natural gas. We have really high energy prices in Germany, one of the highest in the world, and this means that those systems are really economical from a cost-saving perspective. So the total energy consumption that will be covered in Germany is actually, this graph unfortunately does just so 10 gigawatt hours and 5, but it's in between. So it's at least 86% of our energy consumption will be covered. It's between 86 and 91%. And so this means most of our energy consumption in the commercial sector is covered by energy management systems in the future. Also, there's an obligation to conduct action plans. This means businesses with an average annual energy consumption above 2.5 gigawatt hours will have to draft and make publicly available individual and executable action plans. Those action plans consist of economical energy saving measures, and they have to publicize and make them available, the plans of these measures. And there has to be a profitability assessment of the identified measures according to DIN N 17,463, which is the so-called Valerie. Yes, you might ask, why is that 2.5 gigawatt hours? This is also our threshold for the audits. Currently, we were going to change our threshold for audits to 2.5 gigawatt hours. So each company or business with an average consumption above 2.5 gigawatt hours will have to conduct energy audits. Also, there's a focus on data centers in the Energy Efficiency Act. We are estimating our consumption for data centers in the range of 12 to 16 terawatt hours per year, with a rapidly rising due to the ongoing digitalization. And we are putting in requirements for data centers, which is a power usage efficiency of 1.3, and even for new data centers, it will be 1.2. And there will be an energy reusage factor of 20%, which means they will have to use 20% of their waste heat. And also, there's a public register for energy efficiency of data centers with key data points about the energy consumption, which will hopefully enable some competition between data centers above their energy consumption. And there will be a mandatory implementation, of course, of energy management systems on eco-management auditing schemes, which is environmental management system, basically. Yeah, this was a huge public backlash, actually, on this, because the waste heat usage is actually quite the hard criteria for data centers, because they have to include this in their planning from the first stage, or waste heat can't be used. Yeah, they need basically a district heating network in the vicinity. Additionally, heat makes up more than 50% of the German energy consumption, and so we put also an obligation for businesses with an energy consumption above 2.5 gigawatt hours per year, the same threshold as the action plans, to reduce or use the waste heat according to the best available techniques. And yeah, there's also a public platform for waste heat, so companies have to report the potential inside their installations of waste heat usage to a platform, so that district heating network providers can see that within their district there's actually a potential to use waste heat and to decarbonize their respective district heating network. Yeah, I just want to briefly talk about funding, just shortly, because I think my time is also almost coming to an end, about our funding scheme for energy efficiency and decarbonisation. And this is called EEW. This consists of 2 programs, basically, for resource and energy efficiency and renewable process heat. And it's been very successful since its first introduction in 2019 with a growing demand. We had more than 17,000 applications in 2022. And I think, if I read the numbers correctly, even more this year. We got an approved funding of more than 600 million in the last year and a funding efficiency of 20 euros per saved ton of CO2. So this is actually, I think, a very low funding efficiency. This is very economical from the state side. Just so you see the growing demand. This is the number of applications over time. Our different funding models, I don't want to really talk about each one here in detail, just a quick overview for you. The funding rate is ranges between 30 and 65% in the grant and loan variant. And we have a funding rate of up to 60% in our funding competition, which is, I think, a little more interesting because companies compete for funding efficiency. This means the lowest amount they need in order to generate CO2 savings is the one that gets the grant in the end. And it's open to all technologies except fossil lock-in effects. For example, it's not allowed to use installations that use coal. And there's a focus thereby on large projects, since small companies cannot really compete in such a scheme that is huge as a scaling effect. The maximum amount of funding is 15 million euros per project, and the return of investment has to be at least 4 years. So how does it work? This is just a little example. We have a budget of maybe 40 million per round. The budget may vary, but we increased it to 40 million. And on the right-hand side, you can see the funding efficiency ranging from 350 euros per ton. This is not divided by lifetime in this case. And it ranges up until 800. And you see the last 3, they are too expensive and they get deleted and they won't get funding. Also, we have transformation plans within our funding, which means we support businesses in planning and executing their transformation towards carbon neutrality by funding the drafting of a transformation plan. The funding rate is up to 40 to 70%. I think this gains a little traction around the world right now. I think also in the UK, they are discussing transformation plans. What does it consist of? A transformation plan? It's basically an analysis of the individual side of the whole company and including a carbon footprint. The companies have to set a carbon neutrality target by 2045, and they have to target at least 40% of emissions within the next 10 years, and they have to create the plan that outlines how they reach this target. And this then has to be incorporated into the corporate culture. Yeah, also lastly, safeguarding CBAM that we have in Europe, and I think also Australia is one of the first leaders in this regard. We've got also a similar mechanism, which is also here in place. This is basically a carbon tariff on carbon-intensive products that are important to the EU, such as aluminum, cement, iron, steel, electricity, hydrogen, and fertilizers. It will only take effect in 2026, with reporting starting right now, which is why this is also heavily discussed here in Europe. The price for the certificates would be linked to the prices of EU allowances under the ETS, and the importers must make a CBAM declaration with the quantity of goods, the emissions, and certificates for payment of a carbon important tax. And exports, this is also a little bit why this is in discussion, because export are actually not addressed, it's only on imports. So this might pose problems. Yeah, and that's it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And before you disappear, we had a question from our friend Ellen Piers, who was just keen for you to unpack the difference between primary energy and final energy and the way that they're expressed in the targets that have been agreed there in Germany, and why you're interested in both of those metrics.
Yeah, so I mean, there's basically a simple reason. If you would only look at final energy consumption, this doesn't give you the whole picture about energy consumption and the level of energy efficiency that has been reached. Because primary energy consumption you can basically reach increase your efficiency by switching to renewable energies, because if you get a higher amount of renewable energy, you've got less CO2 basically, and this means you've got a lower primary energy consumption. Whereas on the final energy consumption side, you really have to reduce your energy consumption at the user level. So basically, you have to exchange, for example, your light bulbs to LEDs, which then saves the energy. And yeah, so exactly. Whereas final energy you could also just, as I mentioned, switch to solar panels, and you could still use your incandescent light bulbs, and you would have saved primary energy. I think this is the easiest example.
So the point is, from a German perspective, you really need to keep an eye on both of those dials on the
yeah,
dashboard.
exactly. It's both are really critical in my opinion.
Okay, Paul. Well, you can have a little rest now, and I will see you later on for the panel. But I'm very excited to introduce Lisa Neusel, who is an energy researcher at the Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research there in Germany. Now, Lisa, you were unlucky in the sense that you didn't get to join us in Australia early in the year, but your colleague Clemens Rode did, and it was wonderful to have the benefit of Clemens' insights. But we're incredibly excited that you're able to join us to discuss a topic which was a very significant interest, both at the conference and indeed in the workshop that we conducted, which is energy efficiency networks. So we're looking forward to hearing more about them from you, Lisa. Welcome.
Thanks, Luke. Actually, I can see a pretty nice sunset right now. Well, yeah, from Paul Papenbrock, we've already learned about the great success of energy management systems in Germany in his presentation, and I'd like to introduce you to another interesting instrument in this context, which are the energy efficiency networks. Practice in Germany from the past years and lessons learned. So maybe first, let me introduce what is an energy efficiency network for those who doesn't know that yet. Well, in a network, in an energy efficiency network, it is a collaborative energy management approach. So that means 8 to 15 companies, usually, they identify energy savings potentials, they set a collective target, then they implement energy efficiency measures, they monitor the results, and establish a continuous exchange on relevant topics. So that means it is much more than just a bunch of energy experts from companies sitting together at the round table. It is actually energy management in groups, and it is about the actual implementation of energy efficiency measures. And of course, the centerpiece of such a network are the participants, the companies. They are usually brought together by the network initiator, a person who acts as a caretaker during the formation of the network. The operator of the network could be the same person, and he or she organizes the network, accompanies the network activities. There is also a moderator who is responsible for the regular network meetings. Those are about 4 per year. And if necessary, it's also possible to involve external experts with specific areas of expertise, consulting-wise. And in a couple of past years, quite different types of energy efficiency networks have been established or established themselves. For example, regional networks, that could be also sector internal networks for large companies with many sites. It could be company internal networks as well. So quite a bunch of different types. And now let me show you briefly how such an energy efficiency network works. Well, in short, a network goes through a classical PDCA cycle, which is known from the energy management of planning, doing, checking, acting. And as Paul already mentioned briefly, energy management in the German context does not just mean companies measuring their energy consumption. It really is an organizational instrument, more comparable to quality management in companies, but done in a collaborative approach for the networks. So the first step after a network is founded is typically to identify the energy saving potentials in the companies. And therefore, an energy audit is carried out. Individual energy efficiency measures are used to set an individual company target, reducing final energy and CO2 emissions. And then there is a group target set. It's a non-binding target set in a set time frame, which is one of the first steps in the first year of the network work. And next, the company's energy professionals meet at really regular intervals to discuss energy efficiency and possible measures. And if necessary, they involve experts in workshops, etc. And this whole period of typically 2 to 4 years, in this period, the companies really start to implement the identified measures. And the very last step is then the monitoring. And this is where we from Fraunhofer ISI, together with our partner Delphi, are involved these days. This is a part of the data collection to monitor the target achievement of the whole network initiative. That in brief. Now let me explain the framework in which the networks are embedded. Actually, the first networks were established in Switzerland, but soon this approach was adapted by Germany, and nowadays Germany has become the largest operator of energy efficiency networks worldwide. The initiative is known today, started here in 2014, and what is special is that the German approach is built on a voluntary agreement. It's an agreement between the major industrial associations and the federal government. And really this voluntary character in combination with a national target set by the government must be highlighted in this context. So no financial incentives in any way. And that also makes the network initiative one of the key measures of the German National Energy Efficiency Action Plan. And there was a target of emission reduction set of 5 million tons of CO2 per year by 2020, and the goal of establishing a total of 500 energy efficiency networks by 2020 as well. Actually, the final number of networks registered was a bit lower, around 300. The COVID crisis had a quite significant impact here. But in terms of emission saving, an average network performed quite well in this first period from 2014 to 2020. And the latest development now coming to the present and the future is the extension of the scope to now climate change mitigation measures. So since 2021, the initiative is continued under the framework of now called energy efficiency and climate protection networks. And with the aim of 300 to 350 new networks until 2025, the scope was extended. Looking worldwide, energy efficiency networks or similar concepts have been implemented in about 20 countries since the 1990s, with quite some success of this initiative, started in Switzerland and Germany. I'd like to give you some brief insights into the measures that have been implemented in the networks active so far in Germany. This is part of our monitoring. The well-known low-hanging fruits, typical cross-cutting measures such as lighting, compressed air, motors, they make up the largest number of measures. This is why the distribution is weighted towards smaller savings. Actually, the greatest contribution to savings are measures in the area of process heat, process technology, and industry-specific processes. And now I'd like to share some of the key lessons learned from the last 8 years in Germany. And I'm really looking forward to a fruitful discussion on transferability to the Australian context in our panel discussion later. Because what the network initiative demonstrates is that even without financial rewards in terms of funding, companies can be incentivized to participate in networks, to reduce energy costs and gain knowledge of energy efficiency measures in small groups. And this really leads to implemented measures and real energy savings. What was necessary was a high-level national target that was set. and this before mentioned voluntary agreement that was really used as a policy tool to initiate networks at a large scale. And an important lever was also the transfer through the industry associations, which really support the network activities all the years. What we saw is that networks can have a particularly accelerating effect on the progress of companies in terms of energy efficiency, because we sometimes see that even the best-in-class companies can be trapped in fixed patterns of thinking. And this is where the network approach is quite successful. However, the efforts should not be underestimated because it requires really strong promotion of the scheme's benefits to the participants. For example, it needs requires about 3 to 5 working days to persuade a company to join a network. And the transparency about the efforts and costs for the company is an important thing, especially that's critical for SMEs if such a network costs between 1,000 and 5,000 euro per year per company. An important thing we've learned over the years is also the communication. It's important to communicate that the companies have the full control over the information they share in a network, also to gain maximum participation. And even during the data collection at the end of every network period, we've learned that anonymity is a key issue that must be ensured. But of course, the implementation in an operating phase is similar important. And here, well-trained moderators and energy auditors are a key issue. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to discussion later on in the other presentations.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Looking forward to seeing you again in a few minutes. But it is now my great pleasure to welcome my friend Susan Bollmann, who is a member of the Executive Board and Head of Projects at the German Business Initiative Efficiency, DENEF. She is also my co-chair on the Australia-Germany Energy Efficiency Subgroup of the Australian-Germany Energy Working Group, now Energy and Climate Working Group. Susan, things are evolving very quickly. You led the delegation out to Australia back in May. We were very lucky to have you and all of your colleagues with us. And we're also lucky to have you with us this morning, your time, this evening, our time, to talk about financing opportunities, because obviously we can have lots of exciting ideas about decarbonisation and energy management, but it's got to be paid for. So where the money comes from, very important. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Luke. Also pleasure. And also thank you for the invite to speak here, but also to have the opportunity to come over to Australia. And yeah, you just mentioned the work we did on buildings, and I'm really happy to share with you some more details on the current pilot we are doing here in Germany, but maybe later on, I think it's worth to have a separate webinar on this. Yeah, thank you so much. I will share with my slides with you. Hopefully it works in a couple of seconds. And I'm also happy to share with you some ideas and also some insights on the current state of play when it comes to financing energy efficiency here in Germany. I think it's also worth mentioning the public side of the story, but also maybe the private side of the story, because we currently can reflect on some really interesting developments, because actually the private capital market is waking up, and I think it will, come hopefully to a good story in the next couple of years, because we are now see a lot of more interest from the capital market, from the private capital market, actually to also invest in energy efficiency and not only renewables, which has been the state of play in the last couple of years. So yeah, thank you so much. The organization I'm working for actually is the sister of EEC. We are now here in Germany responsible for bringing the energy efficiency on the political state. We have more than 230 members, a lot of jobs, we are actually essential to bring into place the Energiewende and also climate protection. That's actually our mission. And now I try to bring you some more insights also on the current state of play in Germany when it comes to energy efficiency. Paul also already mentioned the current status. Unfortunately, we still lack the ambition. We need to decarbonize all our sectors. Some figures here may be also interesting for you, because the German Energiewende, I think it's a term already set in the world, but actually when we look on the current achievements, we still lack the ambition we would like to have. In general, we are only on the 9th place. In industry, we are only on the 11th place, far behind countries like Romania. And despite the latest analysis has provided some more evidence that we still have a lot of potential that can be tackled, but actually is not, because at least 44% of our current energy demand could be saved economically, which means we don't need any more additional funding to overcome and tackle the potentials. It could be, it could be saved right from the place, which has not been done yet. But I think a new instruments already mentioned by Paul, for example, had become in place and will become in commonplace. So actually, my personal, my personal idea is that we are now hopefully more on the right track. Yeah, more concrete. With the potential we still have in the industry, we could at least save more than 25 billion euro in energy costs, or 2 large power plants and additional 3 LNG terminals. So I think it's pretty clear, a lot of potential that has to be tackled as soon as possible, and to be maybe also more concrete where the most potential in the industry is. It's about process heat, and that's why we have a lot of focus here, and also because of the primary industries like the cement, iron, steel, for example. I think it's pretty clear, and a lot of focus has to be for here. So the current mix of instrument, I think it's also interesting to see. Paul has mentioned on our regulatory law, the Energy Efficiency Act, which is now a new pillar in our mix of instruments, which is also very interesting. And also the development is very interesting, because in the last couple of years, we had a lot of focus on more promotional instruments, big funding programs, some kind of figure focused on single measures. And now we are broadening the scope. It's not only single measures, it's a more systematic approach, which is also, I think, interesting for the companies, because we try to incentivize and also trigger more systematic approaches towards decarbonization of the company at all. In relation to current achievements, but also new instruments will be likely to come in place, because now we have actually the idea of limiting public funding, because also the benefits of public fundings are some kind of limited. So the energy efficiency law is actually a milestone in our current legislation. It will be flanked by funding and other supportive measures, including new and innovative measures that I will figure on later on. The carbon contracts for difference, maybe they are the most interesting, most I think, and also interesting, and maybe also some kind of a complex instrument that will hopefully come in place in the next couple of months. But we also have energy subsidies, for example, tax incentives, so a whole bunch of measures that will come in place actually to have this kind of triangle that the policy experts always talk about to have a mix of instruments in place that will feed the appetite for support and action. So Paul already mentioned the very traditional schemes. I can add here maybe also the opportunity that the current the current program has gone through revision. We have a very broad instruments in place. We have the very starting point, energy consulting, so people and companies can receive funding for energy consulting services. We have then followed by the single measures, or also triggering energy efficiency in plants, in the production schemes, but also on the buildings. So the entire company can be addressed by funding programs. And then the EEW, Paul just mentioned, a very complex, comprehensive, very interesting program to actually trigger investments in decarbonization, not only on energy efficiency, but on the whole bunch of measures that will lead to a decarbonized company at all. Maybe also the most interesting thing, and then this is also where the different approaches like the energy efficiency networks, but also the funding programs come together, because for the transformation concepts, which is a very interesting program, Paul just mentioned, you can get an additional funding if you're a member of a network. So it's not only you can take part in a network, which will also cost money from a human side, but also maybe some kind of fees you will have to pay. But you can also get additional funding and incentives from the public schemes if you take part in a network, which is also interesting, because networks are great. It's not only about taking part in a network and setting targets. It's also about knowledge sharing and sharing experiences, which just a lot more worth than just having a private, for example, energy consultants inside, because energy efficiency networks are also interesting to make the entire company fit for transition. And that's why there's an additional funding here. R&D, I think it's also similar to the Australian market. We have a lot of funding in R&D, our energy efficiency and also energy R&D programs are widely accepted, and they have a prolongation by years, so also very interesting here. But maybe just mentioned, I will give you some more information on a very new instrument that's not in place yet, but under construction, and hopefully we will have first pilots by end of this year. They are actually called the carbon contracts for difference. I have some more details here. It's a very complex system. I'm not an expert here, but if you have any question, please let me know. It's a very interesting book, because companies in the European emission trading system can benefit from it if they invest in climate neutral production processes. Actually, this is the target. Like all the other programs, because public funding is intended to close the investment gap. And in order to accelerate those investments and trigger decarbonization measures, carbon contracts for difference will only support those measures. So the very ambitious one that have not payback yet, which is a lot of investment needed, for example, to set up the hydrogen infrastructure or electrification. So the objective of the program is actually to save investment framework conditions for companies by protecting from price risk between conventional and climate-friendly measures. That's actually the graph on the right-hand side. So thereby companies will be compensated for their additional costs. Yeah, this the graph on the right-hand side. So the additional costs here on the upper end, this is actually the payment that companies can get from the public resources. It's an auction system. So the companies, similar to the EEW, can bid via an auction procedures for the payment. And yeah, it's actually the sum of the climate-friendly system, including capital expenditures plus the operational expenditures for the climate-friendly system in comparison to the conventional system, including the CO2 cost. That's why it's also connected to the ETS. So quite complex system, but actually the systematic is quite simple. It's just the payment for the difference. It's very interesting because actually it's it mainly tries to incentivize the more ambitious climate technology and procedures. And yeah, we will hopefully see the first pilots by end of this year. And I think we will let you know once we have the first figures here, and maybe Paul can also add in here later. Very interesting new system. And maybe because I just mentioned in the beginning of my presentation that I also want to reflect on the private capital market, which is also very keen and has some more appetite to also invest into energy efficiency. And maybe some ideas here. That's what also DENIF has done in the last couple of years, funded by the Federal Ministry for Economics, because we have seen a lot of lack in interest from the private capital market, especially from banks, to provide systematic approaches for energy efficiency in small and medium-sized companies. And they do not have standardized products like loans, for example. For SMEs, it's quite difficult to oversee all the different funding opportunities. So in the end, it's been hard for the banks on the one hand side, but also for the SMEs to find the proper partners to invest into energy efficiency. So we had, together with other banks, the idea to set up a financing platform for energy efficiency. The financing platform has been launched at the beginning of 2022. It's now an inquiry tool, very simple. You can get quotes from more than 300 different banks for your energy efficiency project. Banks will get a first state of, for example, risk for the project that has been provided via the platform. So it's much more easier for banks actually to get the climate the risk profile, but also to calculate the margin, for example, because of the platform that has some calculations in the background. So it's much more simple for SMEs and also for banks actually now to invest and to finance energy efficiency measures. The second one just emerged in the last week, which is also, I think, a very interesting one because the banks maybe they're more focused on single measures, but when it comes to decarbonization, as already mentioned, we have the big chunks. We need the big chunks in order to meet the targets. And what we can now see is also the private market that has much more appetite to invest into energy efficiency and also decarbonization. So the market is evolving, also triggered by the EU taxonomy on sustainable finance. I think this system and the legislation has already been mentioned. And we also see a first little seeds growing. For example, Solar's Capital, that's an investment manager from Switzerland, experts in energy efficiency, that just announced the cooperation with Anchor Energy. Anchor Energy is also one of the partners that have visited Australia in May. It's an energy service company in the field of industrial processes, and now the two partners just announced that they will collaborate to decarbonize different industry sites. Yeah, it's worth 33 million euro, which is quite interesting. It's not the amount of money that we need to decarbonize all the industry, but I think it's a very good first approach, and hopefully we will see more of those projects in the future. Yeah, thank you so much. That's the first ideas from my side. I'm happy to share with you any more insights here, and also looking forward to the panel and your questions.
Thank you, Susan. You're right. We're getting into the panel. Before I do that, I've got a couple of announcements from an Energy Efficiency Council perspective, so you can take a little break, Susan, for about a minute while I go through all of that. I can see one of my colleagues is sharing the slide to remind me about all the things that I'm supposed to say at this point, while you all catch your breath and formulate your questions for our outstanding panel. Next week in Melbourne, we have done for a number of years participating in All Energy Australia and programmed the Energy Management Zone, which is on the showroom floor, and all kinds of interesting insights around particularly technologies and policies that are driving transformation in the residential space, but also beyond. So if you are in Melbourne or can get to Melbourne next week, that's one to check out. Co-located with All Energy on day 2, on the 26th of October, is the Careers for Net Zero Fair, which is this big campaign that we're launching in partnership with our friends at the Clean Energy Council, which has a simple goal to highlight the opportunity for people, young and old, to enter the clean economy, to bring their skills and expertise to bear on this great task of decarbonising our economy. We need people. We need to train people up, but we also need people with existing skills to join the cause. So there's going to be an outstanding program. We have the Premier, Jacinda Allen, we have Mike Cannon-Brooks, we have a number of other luminaries joining staff from the EEC and the Clean Energy Council on stage. That's one to check out, as well as a bunch of exhibitors. It's all very, there'll be a link in the chat. On the 21st November, Residential Energy Performance Summit, EEC joint, and we're going to be doing a dive on all the things we need to bring together to decarbonise homes over the coming period. Disclosure, business models, finance, making sure we're implementing with quality and safety and so forth. That's going to be a great discussion. We're delivering that in partnership with our principal partners, Victorian Government and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. It's going to be very exciting. If you can join us at the EEC AGM on the 28th of November, I won't dwell on that. Holly Taylor, the Head of Strategy and Partnerships at the Energy Efficiency Council, are heading to COP to report back and to engage on the burgeoning space around transition planning for business, something which I spent a bit of time on last year. We're going to be doing that again, and so there's going to be a bunch of engagement in that space, and a very exciting time with the United Kingdom finalising its transition planning framework. And last but not least, it's a little way away, but mark your calendars, the EEC National Conference in Sydney on the 15th and 16th of May. Be there. So I might just, having had that little advert break, invite my panel back to industrial decarbonisation in Germany and what the implications might be for Australia. Thank you, Tennant and Susan and Lisa. I can Paul, if you're looking back in the background, you can turn your camera on as well. But Tennant, if listening to views that are emerging and have emerged in the German context, what is your reaction? What stood out to you as particularly relevant to the thinking that we're doing here in Australia?
So there was a lot to take in there. And among the things that stood out to me is in our local debate, I think we spend a lot of time dwelling on our difficulties and our challenges and what our perception of relative performance. And it is, it is good to hear that in a way that nothing's easy anywhere. There are challenges galore everywhere. The level of funding is different. The level of ambition is different, but hard things are hard. And there's a lot to be learned from the challenges and the successes of jurisdictions like Germany in dealing with some of this. It is interesting, in particular, that the perception within German policymaking is of some of these difficulties still being very hard to make progress on, despite sustained, volatile, yes, but sustained higher prices to many business customers than has been the case on average in Australia. I think in recent times, the prices have been high all over. But the new standard financing tools that were described, I think, are very interesting for making a difference for businesses that are at a size that's below what would ever be considered reasonable for a regulatory mandate. And the approach of these voluntary, bottom-up, unfunded to a large extent, collaborative networks, particularly for businesses that it would not be practical to seek to regulate, is really interesting. I've got a few questions, but for the businesses that are in the larger categories and that are the subject of the new and forthcoming reporting and planning and culture change obligations, what is the feeling from them? Are they broadly on board with yep, let's put everybody on a level playing field and oblige us all to do the same thing, or is there some pushback there? The influence of the taxonomy, the financial taxonomy is really interesting, and Australia is in the process of developing its own taxonomy, which is something that I'm involved with. And the fact that it is seen in Europe as important to start generating greater investment in efficiency, which, as was noted elsewhere, is something that parts of the finance industry have little experience with before and are now finding a driver for more interest in. That's really good. I think the tendency in debates about taxonomies is for all the oxygen to be sucked up in fights about the status of gas. And those fights are important fights, but the status of energy efficiency and the drivers for investment in it is a really constructive, positive thing to emerge from there. I am really interested in the carbon contracts for difference construct. And I think the one question I have is, this is a concept that's been discussed for years, and it's just getting in the next few months, hopefully, to the commencement of pilots. What has proven to be the most difficult aspects of it that have led to that extended gestation period? It has seemed like an easy thing to describe in Australia as a concept, but it seems like it has been much trickier to translate into an actionable program. So very interested in that. And the fact that the EU ETS has seen significant rises in the carbon price in the last few years, and now we're part of a gradual process of implementing the CBAM, both of those things will cut the gap between what businesses are able to sell their products for and what the cost of a fully green production process is, and how is that playing out, that change in perceptions of the size of the gap playing out, both for government willingness to do a contract for difference, given the smaller, the difference will be smaller, and the industry appetite for them. So that was a bit of a gallop and a bunch of questions. I don't know who wants to try and answer them.
Well, should we start with the last one first and just talk a little bit about I guess the long gestation of the carbon contracts for difference and why they've taken a little while to get off the ground. I'm not sure if Paul or Susan wants to chip on that, or
I mean, I can, I guess, elaborate a little bit on that. I mean, in Germany, we've got such a high demand for basically any industry to decarbonize and to basically also make your production even more predictable and your future costs. I mean, so that in itself is a huge conflict, because I mean, what kind of industries do you implement? Who do you exclude? I mean, for example, I'm responsible also for data centers. Data center are for example, not within the scope of this, and there's always backlash if an industry is not being included in such a large scheme. And yes, so there are many detailed questions. Also, what kind of thresholds do you put? I mean, what is your minimum savings? What do you require? I mean, if I remember correctly, it is firstly you need to cut your emissions by half right now. This is I think the latest version of carbon contracts in Germany, and then you have to go on and save later on. Or are you starting with and you say you need to save 90% immediately? There's so many details you need to discuss in the end. And I think one thing that is also important to mention about the contracts for difference that wasn't mentioned from Susan, which I would quickly add as well, is also there's still a little bit of, so to speak, risk involved in the carbon contracts, because the carbon contracts can change to a repayment actually from the company if the carbon contract CO2 prices rise to a certain level. This means companies are actually very economical with their carbon neutral production. So this means they have to pay back the funding to the government. So this is also important to mention, I think, just for the audience. Yeah.
Okay. One of the other points that Tennant raised on the way through was the success of these energy efficiency networks in Germany. Lisa, you talked about this as a voluntary agreement. I mean, you know, you've got the government kind of getting the ball rolling, but then the involvement of industry associations effectively as a conduit to businesses. Can you talk a little bit about how that exactly the voluntary agreement worked? Because it's a fairly novel approach, at least from an Australian perspective.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as I already mentioned, this voluntary agreement was quite a nice joint process between the industry associations and the government, which was quite unique, I guess, because together the structures of the initiative have been defined and the minimum conditions for participation have been set. So I think that is part of the success of the initiative, that it was a joint process. Yeah, also the mentioned target, which was set in a legislative framework, is an important point, I guess. And of course, yeah, the whole administrative structure around that. We have the German Energy Agency, which makes up the head office, managing all the registrations and stuff like this. Yeah, it's quite a good structure here, which was built over the years. And as Susan already mentioned, I mean, for most of the years, no specific funding programs were there for the energy efficiency networks in terms of managing the networks. Of course, the federal government has many support programs for energy efficiency, which are also promoted in the networks. But subsidies for the managing haven't been there for many years, and it worked out quite well. And what is brand new since 2023 is this financial incentive in this large and broad funding program of energy and resource efficiency in the economy, with this 10% bonus for participants of networks in these transformation concepts. So this is actually quite interesting for us to see how this evolves now with this small financial reward at the moment. Yeah.
Well, what we learned in the workshop back in May is these sort of networks are often led by effectively a consultant from the private sector who is invested, obviously, in kind of businesses that are literate about these issues, but is kind of working within this broad framework that has been given the imprimatur both of the government but also of the industry association that's involved.
Yeah, exactly. There are many energy consultants which now dived into this network topic and driving this forward, and there's quite a huge exchange with all these people on a regular basis involved in the initiative.
Maybe I can add here, but maybe also a story among the energy efficiency networks. I think it's also a very interesting mix of companies, not also from the demand side, but also from the supply side, because also energy service companies and energy companies are involved in managing energy efficiency networks. So it's very, very interesting. And I made a footnote on the history of energy efficiency networks. There has been a deal among the German government and also the network and associations. It's a voluntarily set instrument, but actually there was a deal between the two parties. On the one hand side, we have the opportunity as a government actually to oblige companies to save energy, or you are engaged or will be engaged in energy efficiency networks, so you won't be obliged by the German government. So this was actually the first step, and then actually the associations and the governments, they had this deal. Okay, we will engage our companies in the networks, and then we are not obliged to save energy. So actually, it's the story among the networks are slightly different. It's not only voluntary, but there's a deal. But actually, the success of the networks and now companies are a little bit more intrinsically motivated to engage in energy efficiency networks, and that's why I think there's no necessity to fund the engagement of companies, because they have this intrinsic need to deal with the challenges actually to decarbonize all their processes and structures, because it's not only a question of is it a competitive advantage to decarbonize? No, it's actually our mission. It's all the need actually to be competitive in the future. So that's why hopefully also the interest to engage in energy efficiency networks will emerge in the next couple of years. I think we still have a challenge to communicate the chances of engaging in energy efficiency networks also still in Germany. So I think it's not widely accepted or widely known what the chances of engaging in energy efficiency networks are. I think it's also a task for DENIT, for example, to engage further. But I think the system is great. It's professionally managed. There are a lot of experts around that can consult on a first level exchange. So I think it's great. I'm a fan of networks.
Very good. That's very incredibly helpful. I just want to give a shout out to the folk that are on the call. If you have questions for our panel, please do drop them into the Q&A tab. But I am interested to dive into something which has been touched on by a few of you, but we haven't sort of unpacked explicitly, which is kind of like the push for not just efficiency, but also electrification, particularly in industry. In Germany, it's something that's of interest here in Australia as well. I can see our friend Jared Leake from the Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity on the line. We've done quite a bit of work with A2EP, sort of exploring the role that electrification can play in decarbonisation of industry in Australia, particularly low temperature process heat. How much is actually happening in Germany on that front? Because one would expect, given the ambition in Germany, but also, frankly, the whole situation that's played out over the last number of years around both energy security and cost associated with gas use, that this would be quite a rich vein for government and business to mine. Has there been a lot of activity in the electric process in Germany over the last 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, so maybe I can just start from the the government perspective. I mean, of course, I mean, in our funding, electrification is also already a huge focus. And when we last time we renewed our funding scheme, I mean, we put a heavy emphasis on the electrification. For example, we were changing our CO2 emissions factor for electrification and made it better, so that actually companies are more incentivized to get better funding and to invest in electrification. And also, I think on more broader scope, I mean, we have different scenarios for our decarbonization targets in Germany, and we are always also doing cost analysis, including. And actually, if you look at the different scenarios, the ones that are based on electrification instead of the use of hydrogen, for example, are the ones that are most economical and most cheap, so to speak, to achieve. So yes, there's a huge push on electrification, and with our huge planned new schemes, for example, decarbonization of the industry and also the carbon contracts. I mean, there's also basically an incentivizing the use of electrification, because if you got a renewable source of electricity, you basically have a green production and you save CO2. So you can always use this and get funding. Yeah.
Lisa or Susan, do you have anything to add?
Well, maybe. Oh, okay.
No, please go ahead.
Something what we see is that, for example, private consumers, they really now start investing in heat pumps or electric cars if there's the economic incentive. I'm not sure if, this is. We're already at that point when it comes to industry level. What we see in studies we do is that the technology is, I don't know, like large industrial heat pumps or electric steam boilers, etc., are technically ready. The readiness level is there. They are ready to diffuse into the market, but market diffusion is still a thing, because, well, the electricity prices are still not affordable or competitive. So this is the policy framework which still lags maybe a bit behind there. And I guess now it's this time where we have to start transforming into electric plants, electric boilers, etc., to avoid lock-in effects on fossil technologies. So I guess we're on the way, but at the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just quickly add that on the point of electricity prices, I mean, in Germany, there's also the discussion about industrial prices for electricity, and we already have in place a compensation scheme for the industry that is heavy on electricity usage already. And so basically compensation schemes in that regard are in place in part, and even are planned maybe or discussed for the.
Kenneth, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, well, so with a question about another aspect of this electrification drive, that will involve some users, a significant number of users, particularly household, but also some in industry, users of the gas distribution system ultimately disconnecting from it. There's also a strong policy push in Germany around industrial use of hydrogen in contexts where that will make sense.
Yeah.
What is the approach to managing the impact on continuing users of the distribution and pipeline systems of the exit of other users? Is like in terms of the financial impact? Because I hear questions from our Australian industry members about, or am I going to be the one paying for the pipeline system when everybody else is gone? But also the physical management of all that disconnection and the safe operation of what remains as long as it is still being used. Is this all a forward-looking, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it situation, or are there plans in place to manage those things?
Yeah, I guess this one goes to me as well, I think. Yeah, this is actually, I think, one of the biggest questions, what to do with the existing natural gas infrastructure that has already been built and built up. I mean, there are plans to use green hydrogen in the future and to provide it for the natural gas net, and even some people suggest, and it's actually being discussed, to even provide homeowners with green hydrogen in the future. Personally, I think this is economically not feasible. We will have to phase out some of the infrastructure, and but this is not yet. There's no official position yet. This is still being discussed.
Okay, it's a familiar situation.
We've actually got a few questions down in the chat with 7 or 8 minutes to go. So we'll try and have a stab at one or two of these. There is a question here again on if energy efficiency networks, Lisa, and it makes a good point, because in Australia, look, when we talk about efficiency networks and their applicability in the Australian context, there's a certain amount of skepticism that we get that Australian companies would be willing to engage in this, and part of it is like the need for a certain amount of openness about what's going on within one's business, concerns around data protection. So our questioner in the chat is asking, how do efficiency networks in Germany deal with those sorts of data and confidentiality issues?
Yeah, this was a concern of the German companies as well. Well, from our subjective experience, this competition aspect is neither a major obstacle nor a major advantage for the companies, because we see that competitors take part in the same network, because companies, as soon as they joined, they know that they can decide for themselves what information they share with the other participants, and an exchange about energy efficiency does not necessarily mean revealing internal process-specific details. So, but of course, that's a thing of communication and transparency, which is necessary. And in terms of data collection, we as a monitoring institute ensure the anonymity. So of the data, it's only an aggregated data collection, which, yeah, for sure is an important point to gain the trust of the companies.
Okay. There's a question here that actually echoes one of the comments that Tennant made on the way through, so we might go to that, which is reflecting on the fact that we've recently introduced some emissions reduction requirements on large Australian industry through the safeguard mechanism. The questioner is interested to know, given Germany is in a similar position of placing requirements on large businesses, what the reaction has been, how, happy or unhappy larger businesses have been about taking this on. Is this controversial, and what is there any learnings that we can derive from the German experience as we seek to engage businesses in this journey here in Australia?
Yeah, I mean, should I just start, or I mean, I'm
great.
not talking for the businesses, I guess. I mean, this would more be Susan's job, I guess. Yeah, I mean, for example, the obligation for energy management for businesses, from I heard, that's actually not much of a backlash yet. But in other terms, waste heat usage, or for example, especially the data center sector, they have been on the fence. Actually, they don't want to be regulated. I mean, this has been a sector that uses a lot of electricity and a lot of energy in general, but they've been very secretive about their operations, so to speak, in the past. And yeah, so of course, no business basically, or no industry wants to be regulated in the end, but energy management systems have been widely in use in Germany already. I mean, I already mentioned there's more than 6,000 energy management system certifications in Germany. We expect after the obligation 3,000 more certifications to be put into place. And many companies, they already have in place in order to get certain compensations, because there's oftentimes a requirement for companies to have a management system in place in order to get funding. Yeah, and that's my take on it for that part.
And that data that you shared around companies several years after implementation of an energy management system still achieving 4% improvements in their cities is really remarkable.
Yeah, exactly. This is really remarkable. Also, in my opinion, this is all comes from a study we did last year on energy management systems at the end, before we started to actually write our regulation. And so, yeah, I can only say, and for many companies, this can be a really economical measure. I mean, from what we found out, for most companies that are being regulated, more than 9% of them, it will be very, very economical actually. And if the prices for energy continue to rise, which I actually hope will not happen, but if it starts, if the trend continues, I mean, it will be even more economical.
And you also get funding for installing energy management systems, right? Don't you? I think it's also incentivized by the German government. So
well, not directly, I have to say. I have to say it's not directly funded, because that wouldn't be legal. If it's an obligation, we couldn't fund it.
Yeah,
but
right.
yeah, there's always sometimes there's a requirement to have it in order to get funding from different funding schemes. Yeah, exactly. So it's oftentimes a requirement, yeah, to get funding, but you have to do more to get the funding, not just having the management system in place.
We are out of time, and you've all been incredibly generous. Lisa, Susan, and Paul getting up very early. This webinar started at 7:30 a.m. German time, and so we appreciate your commitment to sharing insights and expertise. And Tennant, this is about the time every night where you're down to cook dinner, and so we appreciate the sacrifice of you and your family to join us today as well.
I will get them fed one way or another.
We will monitor the platform formerly known as Twitter to see what you ultimately put on the table tonight. Thank you all. It's deeply appreciated. As Amelia mentioned on the way through earlier, we are midway through a process of preparing a report, which, because unpacking the issues that have been canvassed today, we're looking forward to sharing it. Not just the things that we have to learn from Germany, but the things we have to share from an Australian perspective for a German audience as well. That'll be exciting. We'll certainly share that with all of you in due course. But that's all we have time for this evening / this morning. So thank you all again for participating, either in the Q&A chat or indeed on the panel, and we'll talk to you again soon.